So today we're going to talk about the two different games we play at the table. What does that even mean? What am I talking about? This is one of those things that is both really obvious, but also really interesting when we look at it in this particular way. When we GMs sit down at the table and we're running our fantasy RPG and our players are sitting down at the table and they are playing in our fantasy RPG, we like to think we're playing the same game. But we're really not playing the same game. We're really playing two different games that happen to be meshing together. We're playing two different sides, two totally different ways with totally different sets of rules that are in front of us. And we're talking about the points where these two sets of rules connect to one another. That if I do damage, you know to subtract it from hit points. If I ask for a saving throw, you know what ability score to roll it on. If I give you a DC, you know what skill to roll against. We have these sort of interface points that cross the table from what the GM is describing to what the player is describing. But we're really got two separate things. And that example is when we look at the stat block for the white, it doesn't look anything like a character looks like. That monsters, the design of monsters, this has been true since 4th edition. 3rd edition, you actually had monsters that were built along the lines of the same rules that characters were built with. And that was kind of a mess. It meant that building and customizing monsters was a real chore. But since 4th edition, monster design and character design have been very different. And that was true all the way back. That was actually only 3rd edition was the version where monster design and character design were designed together. Monsters had always been designed differently than characters when you look at 2nd and 1st and early editions of D&D. So the idea that you have these two different things, you have monsters on one side, you have characters on the other side, and yet they're built completely differently, kind of highlights the point that we're kind of playing two different games at the table. We have two different sets of rules. We have two different ways that we look at it. So, well, who cares? Okay, so let's say that's true, right? And I think it is true. But who cares? Why does that matter? Why it matters is that means that either side of the equation can change out parts of their game engine and not affect the other side. And an example is I had people who asked me, hey, are you going to be running Level Up Advanced 5e? You talk about running Level Up Advanced 5e all the time. Are you actually going to run it? Now, what they mean is, am I going to make the players use? Because I've been running Level Up Advanced 5e for more than a year now. It's been over a year since I've run a 2014 Monster Manual monster. And almost always I grab the Level Up Advanced 5e Monster Menagerie and use that. I've been using that for now a long time, and I love it because in my experience, in my opinion and my experience, it is better in every way than the 2014 Monster Manual. The Monstrous Menagerie is better in every way. The monsters are designed better. The layout is fine. The addition of treasure parcels and random encounters and not monster lore has made that book far more valuable to me than the Monster Manual. Now, we could argue about things like art. I think the art in the original Monster Manual, in many cases, I like it better. The layout is also a little bit tight in Level Up Advanced 5e's Monstrous Menagerie. But generally speaking, it is a really, really fantastic book. And I like it in every way, which meant that I could rip out the Dungeon Master's Guide and rip out the Monster Manual and replace them with Level Up Advanced 5e's Trials and Treasure and the Monstrous Menagerie. And now my part of the game is running completely differently. And the players are still playing. Now, the monsters they're facing are slightly different, and they're seeing new abilities. Again, the Level Up Advanced 5e White is different than the 2014 White. In many cases, the monsters are hitting harder. But the reality is that they're still playing the same game. They have their player's handbook on their side. They're using the 2014 player's handbook on their side, but I'm running a completely different side of the game. And so when we think about the fact that the GM side of the game and the player side of the game are really two different games with two different engines, and we can rip out and put in new parts of those engines, we really get an interesting look at how modular this game is. So that idea, when people have asked me, like, am I playing Level Up Advanced 5e? My answer is, yeah, I'm playing it now. On the GM side, it's 100% Level Up Advanced 5e. Not 100% because I'm including other monster books too. I use Tome of Beasts 1 a lot. Now, again, this isn't like completely wild, because an example is, have you ever run a third-party adventure? Right? If you've run an adventure that wasn't published by Wizards, technically, you're flopping out parts of the engine because you're finding a set of rules, a set of a scenario that came from another publisher, and you're bringing that in. Now, of course, people homebrew all the time. So you're flopping out parts of your game for homebrew parts of your game all the time. And it changes the game, and it changes the adventures, and it changes the story. And you're able to do that because this game is so flexible, you can rip out those parts of the engine. I think it's really, really fascinating when we think about how the design of this game is that lets us rip out these pieces. You can say, oh, I don't really like how I've been running travel, so I'm going to kind of pull out the very thin travel system that is in there and slide in Uncovered Journeys by Cubicle 7. And now you have this whole new big thick book that talks about all the different kinds of journeys and all the kinds of encounters and all the kinds of systems and all the kinds of character roles that can exist for characters while they're going on these journeys from a book that was never even considered when the 2014 books were published. I think that's fascinating. So one way I like to think about this is from like the nerd programming perspective of an API, that instead of, in the world of computer programming, there's this thing called application programming interfaces, which is like when I want to reach out to a website and pull down data from that website, I don't need to know the underlying structure of how that website works. I can just make certain calls and they will respond with certain amounts of values coming back. And it allows two different applications that don't understand their underlying technology and are built on totally different technology to be able to talk to one another. That's really how 5th edition works. That 5th edition has this sort of abstracted interface, ability checks, combat abilities, hit points, armor class, lots of other things, where those things all match up and there are certain perspectives. We expect DCs to be within a certain range. We expect damage values to be in a certain range. Hopefully a CR3 is equivalent to another CR3 is equivalent to another CR3, although we know that that's not really true. But you saw me comparing multiple CR3s earlier, and you can see like, okay, here's variance in these CR3s, but we can account for that variance. So you have these sort of interfaces that connect together, and these different interfaces that connect together mean that we can rip out and change and switch out and custom build and swap out and do all kinds of stuff on both sides, and still the game meshes together at the same level. Now, what's interesting is when people have been talking about the 2024 books, there's been a lot of people saying, I don't think it's really going to be compatible, or it's really D&D 5.5, or it's really a 6th edition. We shouldn't pretend it's something else. And there's a lot of hemming and hawing, but I don't think it's actually going to be that hard for the 2024 books to plug into everything else that we're using. I think that you could have a 2024 player's handbook and have characters built from the player's handbook that connect to Level Up Advanced 5e or Tales of the Valiant or the 2014 books or whatever. And they're probably going to mesh well enough in the same way that not every CR3 is equivalent to every CR3. Every level 7 character isn't going to be the same as every other level 7 character. Sometimes they might be more powerful and stuff like that. I have a feeling that 2024 characters are going to be basically one level higher in power than we think they are. So a level 2 2024 character is going to feel more like a level 3 2014 character, but maybe not. Probably, again, that 4th and 5th level, probably not. But because they get an extra feat, because things have been streamlined a bit, I have a feeling they're going to be slightly more powerful. They're going to feel more powerful. Same is true with Tales of the Valiant, where I think they've said characters that are built in Tales of the Valiant are going to be meatier and tougher than your vanilla 2014 characters could be. But we've seen a lot of variance just in 2014 characters, like whether or not they have power attack or not, whether or not they have certain spells, whether or not they've multi-classed, whether or not they have certain feats. We see a lot of range within the levels of characters anyway. So I actually don't think we're going to see I don't think it's going to be that difficult to see the 2024 D&D books meshing in with all of the other 5e stuff we have, because we're seeing all of the other 5e books meshing in together. We're seeing we're seeing Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and Xanathar's Guide. We're seeing other books like Kobold Press's Tome of Heroes and Midgard Heroes. We're seeing all of these different books on both sides that are able to mesh together, and we are able to run at the table. Now, obviously, there's lots of areas where we can bring in books and ideas and concepts from other games that don't have a direct mechanical effect. So in those, we don't even need to worry about the API. If you like the travel system you find in an OSR game and you want to bring that OSR travel-like system into your 5e game, you can just do it. If you want to grab the escalation die from 13th Age because you think that's cool, you can just do it. There's lots of times where we can find pieces from other games and flop them into our game. And the neat thing is, on the GM side, we can try stuff out for one little bit. We don't have to decide, oh, hey, I'm going to rip out every monster that I've ever used and replace them with other monsters. Like a lot of times people are talking about Flea Mortals. I think MCDM referred to Flea Mortals as a replacement to the monster manual. You can, but you don't have to. Instead, you could just say, I only want to run the vampire from MCDM. I'm being selfish. I wrote the vampire for MCDM. But like, you could decide you just want to run one monster and see what it's like. I've done this where I haven't run every monster from Flea Mortals, but I've run the hobgoblins because I was like, oh, let me try those hobgoblins. They sound really cool and interesting. Let me drop those in and see what they do. And they did some stuff and I tried them out. I go, so that's how these guys are different than the typical monsters that I face. So you can try things on the GM side very atomically. Hey, I just want to try this one thing for this one battle. I just want to try this one thing for this one check. You can do really, really small changes and have them be one-off changes that only happen at one time. And then if you decide you like them, maybe you wire them in more. But maybe you say, like, I'm going to have a magic item. I think I did this where I was like, I wanted to try the Tales of the Valiant luck system, but I wasn't sure I wanted it to be forever. So I said, let me put this in here and see how it works and try it just for like a session. And then I was like, oh, this worked really well. Let me do it for another session. Let me do another session. Suddenly, now it has replaced inspiration in all of my games because the luck system from Tales of the Valiant, for me as a GM, is a superior system because I don't have to think about it. They get luck. They get the advantage of having something good happen when they fail a roll, which I think is really outstanding from a beat and a pacing standpoint. And they manage it themselves, which means I don't have to manage it at all. So I love the Tales of the Valiant luck system. And that is an example of like where I can take a component out of 5e, rip it out, replace it with another one, and everything works perfectly. So this idea that we have this sort of abstract game, that we're playing two different games at the table, that these games have this sort of general, this abstract interface that exists between these different sides, and that we can sort of slide things into the interface, we can connect things into the interface. It makes our game so flexible. It means that we can change things so much. And it's one of the things I just absolutely adore about 5th edition. 5th edition has been so popular over the past 10 years and there are so many different sources of information that are compatible with 5th edition that we can try out with 5th edition, that it makes this whole system one where we can just pick components from all over the place, try things out, drop them in, replace things, pull whole sections out, replace them with whole other sections. And it means that we get to build the exact game we want to build for the table and for the players that we have running at it. So it's a really, really powerful idea. I wanted to highlight that idea and kind of hopefully give that to you so you can kind of think differently about what 5th edition actually is, and that recognize that 5th edition can be a unique RPG system that each of us builds for our table from the wide range of components that are out there. So I hope that was kind of a useful way of thinking about the game.